All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back to Swarmstead Bees and Gardening and the Mike Bomb Beekeeping Podcast. My name is Bruce Rodriguez. Thanks to everybody on the playback, watching the replay. Tonight, my guest is Ben Hoksch. He's a treatment-free beekeeper from Iowa, and he was kind enough to come on and give me somebody to talk bees about, talk bees with. If you could, Ben, just briefly tell us a little bit about, how long you've been messing with bees and kind of what got you into it, if you could.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bruce. Been following the Facebook page and your stuff since the beginning, and really helped form some notions before I could form some notions for myself. So I appreciate that. Um, this is, I think, my fourth or fifth winter with bees. Um, I've got about 40 colonies going into winter. I think 15 of them are in 5-frame boxes. Whether they're stacked 2 or 3 high. I've gotten into grafting and that kind of stuff this year. I've got a background in biology, natural resources management, and classic ecology. So, research surrounding native plants and insects. And when I was living in Wisconsin, I met a guy who had a bunch of beekeeping equipment for sale and one colony, and had some spare change lying around. And over the last few years, I've just kind of bought him out of all of his stuff, and kind of developed my own method based on what I've learned from other people. And that involves not treating and not feeding, catching as many swarms as I can, and doing removals. I'm here in central Iowa. This is basically, we call it the breadbasket, but it's basically an agricultural desert. The only habitat we really have is along the river corridors. In central Iowa, it's the Des Moines River, runs northwest to southeast. But beyond that, you're lucky to have much of any habitat. Even given that, there's a ton of beekeepers in the state. There's a ton of commercial beekeepers. They generally follow these river corridors as well. And a lot of hobbyists, a lot of folks in the city running bees, and really active beekeeping community as well, which I kind of try to exist on the fringe on for obvious reasons for some folks.
How do you get your bees? Swarm trapping, swarm chasing, cutouts, you were saying?
Yeah, all the above. So, as life can kind of happen, I didn't get to, this is the first year I didn't catch a swarm in a trap. And I usually hang about 30 or 40. And 10 frame laying boxes, one drawn comb, a bunch of empty foundation, some lemongrass oil. I put 6 or 7 of them up. I actually didn't bait them with lemongrass oil this year, just because I'm busy running other aspects of my business. I didn't get a hit, which is surprising, but I didn't have that many up. But I do get a ton of phone calls for just swarms as well. So was able to pick up maybe 15 or 20 on my own, and then hand off 20 or more to other beekeepers in the area. There's not a lot of people who do removals in this part of the state, and really any part of the state, it seems like. And as I tell the clients, I do charge for what I do. I'd hate to have hired me 4 years ago to do a removal, but these days I've kind of figured out how to do it right. And the people who do it, a lot of them don't want a mentor. I try to take on folks who want to learn about it. And actually next year, got a grant with the treating beekeeping community here in town, and I'm going to be teaching like a half-day course on doing a removal from a house. So it's going to be free for the participants, and the landowner is actually going to get a free removal as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And I'm not really concerned about, teaching myself out of a job. I think a lot of folks are just interested in it, and being the person who kind of has the experience, everything I do is multifaceted, the maple syrup, the bees, the tree trimming, the small scale farming and that kind of thing, bartending. So the more people that can be doing this stuff, the better, because I get enough bee phone calls during the growing season to want to hand them off to other folks.
Cool. So you have a background in biology. So something I want to start asking everybody that comes on no matter what they do for beekeeping. I want to ask them, what do they think would happen if under some strange circumstances there were no more people to take care of honeybees, or if just everyone decided as a group. Of course, it'll never happen, but if everyone decided to just stop treating their bees, what do you think would happen?
Yeah. Well, I think there'd still be bees. I mean, that's the first, my gut reaction is that there'd be a ton of them. I think when it comes to, it's not answering your question. I see enough feral colonies living free even in the middle of the cities because I do tree work and I do bee work. Any of these tree services or cities in the area, they call me when there's a situation where they cut down a tree or something happened where bees are living without, any type of human touch. That being said, most of these colonies are a little smaller, and I think a lot of the issues we run into related to bees surviving our methods is, unlimited brood nest and unlimited honey storage. I see a lot of colonies here that can't handle mite loads, and that's because, it's because they can't handle them. We haven't been selecting for it. But you give these commercial bees these unlimited nest sizes, and they just can't handle it. So the first few years, you'd probably see you might see a bit of a drop, but that's probably just because we'd see less of an influx of bees from the south coming up here. Whenever you talk to a beekeeper in Iowa, if you're just getting into it, you hear about the Iowa honey wars. And back when Iowa was being settled, Missouri and Iowa had like a boundary dispute. And there was a tax collector from Missouri who crossed the Des Moines River in southeastern Iowa and went to try to collect taxes from some of the folks in southern Iowa. Well, that wasn't going to fly with the folks down there. So they ended up kind of holding him hostage for a little while. And once they turned him loose, after the law got involved, on his way back to Missouri, he cut down 2 honey trees and harvested the honey as payment for not making your taxes. Anyway, that fella got in trouble, and they got paid out for the honey. But I think they'd be fine, like it would just be like it was back then. We wouldn't be harvesting as much timber. There'd be more hollows. There'd probably be more bees than there are today, honestly. Besides the folks bring them in commercially. That's kind of a bit of a ramble, but I'm not worried about the populations if anything like that happens.
Right. Okay. And then on the other side, I'd like to ask everybody, what if all the treatment-free beekeepers got on board and started treating the same way everyone else is treating, and all the feral colonies were put in line, removed, put into treating regimen? When would we get out of this mess of needing to treat it if everybody did it? Do you think any of these solutions would somehow free us one day?
Of course not. It's like the only solution is genetic. I mean, it's as simple as that. The only solution is like if we all treated. The reason these mites keep showing back up in these treating colonies is because you can't kill them all, and what's the point? As an ecologist, it's simple. It's a parasite-host relationship, and I think the idea of an equilibrium in nature doesn't exist. Every bee colony will never be resistant, to anything. That's how biology works. It's a constant arms race, and I think I like those questions, but I think some of the things that these treating beekeepers get confused with is that, like, folks like myself or yourself or really any other non-treating, beekeeper out there, I'm not expecting 100% survival. I I wouldn't mind it. That'd be interesting. I'd probably have more bees than I knew what to do with, but I'm never entering anything expecting all of them to survive. I know beekeepers who take great pride on having every single colony survive their year, or 49 out of 50, and they'll throw these numbers around like it's something to brag about. And yeah, I mean, how to manage your bees the way you want to manage them. I have no interest in that. I'm not that. Uh, I am not. I'm not desperate to keep my bees alive, because
Yeah,
I
I
don't want.
mean,
I don't want bees that can't handle it.
I had 100% survival one year when I only had 20 colonies, and it was a nightmare, really, in the spring. And I would be in a cold sweat if all of mine survived. But I'm not a bee seller, really. You know, a large scale bee seller that can dump off that many bees, especially especially with everyone that brings Florida nukes and packages up a month before I can even do splits here in this area. So I really don't want that many of my bees to survive. And like I talk about all the time, they'll talk about the olden days where no bees died. They just every one of them lived every time, every colony, every year, every winter, and it just sounds like a bunch of baloney. Like we would be buried in bees very quickly if everybody's bees survived every year.
I mean, I can't imagine any situation where there's any organism that really follows that through. I mean, it's outside of. I mean, I'd say the laws of nature, but I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I'm not trying to exist in a world that's that controlled.
Yeah. So in your area, since you have such a large beekeeping community, you have so many. You said commercial beekeeping operations kind of passing through. That has to affect your way of keeping bees. It has to affect your survival rate. If you're not propping them up in any way, can you tell us a little bit about how it is with that kind of bee community surrounding you all the time? And no, you said there's not much wild habitat for bees to live in feral conditions, or is there?
Well, the places habitat exists. These river valleys, even in the middle of cities. The biggest city in Iowa, Des Moines. It's got. We had a storm go through 2 years ago. In one city in Iowa, it took out 50% of the tree canopy just in that city. And that's several 100,000 people. Um, I There's hundreds of hollow trees in Iowa, in just the city of Des Moines, excuse me, that have bee colonies. When that big storm came through, there was like a 200-year-old red oak, and I mean, the tree was so big around, you get 5 people to get your arms around it, and it cracked off about 15 feet off the ground, and it just totally smashed this car. I mean, like wheels bowed out to the sides, uh, and there was a bee colony inside of it, and it was just like smashed car, bees everywhere. Even in an open air situation, they managed to rear 2 queen cups, and I was able to get a couple of queens out of there. Um, but these colonies exist, but the notion my experience is that these colonies open breed with a lot of these managed colonies. Um, Now, the first 3 years that I kept, obviously wasn't as good of a beekeeper as I am now. I'm not great, but I'm better than I was. Um, and was able to, I, I guess I kind of convinced myself through seeing really, really poor survival, that most of the bees I'm working with caught as swarms, caught in swarm traps, are from these managed colonies, because they didn't really seem to have much mustard to them. I've had a few standouts even in that time, colonies that have produced good honey and kept good populations and not shown signs of parasitic mite syndrome or European foul brood or any of those other things. And I've kept those around. Um, but I've kind of taken the approach of, since I'm putting all of this energy into it, I don't want to I want to speed this process up a little bit because there's other people in my area in the Midwest, at my latitude even, that are in similar habitats and are keeping bees in a way that doesn't manage for that doesn't use treatments for mites. So I basically kind of sort through some of my colonies, and it's not really scientific at all. It's kind of gestalt, It's like, okay, I pulled this colony out of a house that was built in 1852. It's obviously had bees in it for 100+ years based on the propolis and how many sections of wall they've lived in. Um, the owner of the house will say they've been there for 3 years. Who knows if they have or haven't? That colony, I'll acquire them and the queen, and I'll let them ride. Um, if I get a call from the middle of the city, even though there may be a bee tree in that area, which there likely is, um, there's also a good chance it came from a managed colony. And to avoid, losing that colony and trying to see if they have the genetics that I want, I'll requeen them with queens that I graft from my survivor stock, or I will buy queens from other folks. So the last 2 years, I've brought in genetics from a few different folks, some treatments free, some not, just to kind of see how they go. I've been interested in the Russian line. I know there's, people have their own opinions about them. I see some promise in those genetics, but holding them side by side to some of these treatment-free folks I've gotten queens from, they don't survive as well. I guess I'm trying to avoid a bit of a genetic bottleneck and trying to speed up the process of having more colonies that are resistant or resistant enough. And that's been working. This last year, I had some problems with my hive design that trapped a little bit more water than I wanted them to. I've made some changes this year. The skunks here are pretty brutal. They've kind of hammered on some of my winter colonies. I've installed these tack strips on the entrance and on the ground below the hives to manage for some of that stuff. With the goal of trying to supply folks in this area with the genetics that I prefer, with more mite-resistant bees, I'm interested in trying to take a few shortcuts, I guess you could say, without just sorting through all the genetic riffraff. I think I can get there faster by incorporating these queens.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I have some colonies that are from my oldest lines of bees, that go back pretty far, and they're just winners every single year. So, if I get a swarm that I know is definitely from a beekeeper, I have actual beekeepers call me. They only want to have 2 colonies.
Yeah.
They swarm. They're hanging there in the yard. They don't have equipment. Can you come and get them? Yeah, I'll come get them. And they're completely propped up, like they were just babied through the whole winter. Yeah, there's no shame in requeening those. I'm not gonna sit back and wait and see how they're gonna do. Sometimes I don't happen to have the resources necessary to requeen them right away, and they may swarm again. Things happen, but yeah, that's a good idea. I don't see anything.
Well, and sometimes even I'll let those colonies, I'll put them onto fresh comb. If I don't have any queens available at the time, I'm just getting into grafting. I'll put them onto drawn comb and let them make a few supers of honey. And then come July or early August, when I actually have time to rear some queens, I'll split those up into 5-frame nukes and give them some cells. And they've made a honey crop for me, and I've turned them into the genetics that I actually want. So it's useful as well.
Awesome. So then, I always talk a lot on here about comparing apples to oranges when someone will say, you're survive. I have more bees survive than you. My survival rate is higher, but the truth is that there's no such thing as treated survivor bees. That's just, it doesn't make sense. But just for the heck of it, is there kind of a percentage that you expect or that you kind of average over just winter survival, because that doesn't take into account splits in the spring? It doesn't take into account how much you've expanded. I'm just curious how many bees make it through an Iowa winter.
Yeah, well, Iowa, I guess just to start on that, if you look at the data that's available, and that's, it's only as good as the data, right? The people that sign up for it. But Iowa has the lowest winter survival rate of any state in the nation.
Oh, wow.
We're at 58% colony loss. At least that's what it was at last year, if I remember right. And, every fall, you see the same posts where it's like, oh, I did my treatment wrong. But it's also, they're spraying soybeans, and I have a pesticide kill in my colony. So with this level of agricultural intensity that we have, these beyond, trying to find bees that are resistant to mites, in this sea of treated bees, we also have this this layer of slim pickings in habitat and pressure from the pesticides that are found in these flowers. I'm getting a little off track here, but I got just one more thing related to that. I do some botany work for the state of Minnesota, and I was on a project looking at a butterfly called the Dakota skipper. And Dakota skipper it only feeds on, it feeds on this small group of grasses, and it only exists, I think it's in 2 places in the state. And the one place it exists is because it was reintroduced, and it's a very small population that's barely holding on. But the other one is way up in the northwest part of the state. And even though great habitat exists everywhere else in the state, that was the only place in the state where, when they tested nectar of flowers, they didn't find concentrations of neonicotinoids and other pesticides. So even like 100 miles away from the nearest, crop field, these things are still in the nectar of plants. And when you're only separated by a 40-acre field in Iowa, it's amazing how those extra stressors can affect bee survival. That being said, back to your initial question, being a beginning beekeeper, I still am a beginning beekeeper. It's drastically changed, over the last 4 years. So I think my first year I had 2 colonies. One of them survived. That was 50%. The next 2 years, I caught a bunch of swarms, and I've lost, it was probably 80% or more, even 90% of my bees those first several years. And that's kind of what changed me thinking about trying to incorporate new genetics. Now, last year, I've changed my hive design. I've changed the genetics I've sourced my bees from. Last year, I had, I think, 20 out of 37 survive, and several of those were doomed from the beginning. They were light and didn't have big populations. Because I didn't feed at all last year. I fed 2 years ago for the first and only time. And this year, I've had 2 colonies go down in the last couple of weeks. But besides that, bees are looking good. I've only got higher hopes now for moving down the road. So I think for me, I really don't have any kind of baseline data to really say, because my knowledge on how I'm keeping has been changing so much.
That's similar for me. It was really like the 4th or 5th year of really messing with bees a lot that things really turned around. And I don't still make the same mistakes that I did earlier. And the loss, I always have to say loss, because we don't pay for bees, we're not losing anything. There's just wild swings from my first few years to my last 4 or 5 years. And last year was great. This year it's looking great too. Especially since stopping feeding. So you used to feed? Oh, and then you stopped feeding? Is that what happened?
Yeah. I did some open feeding 2 years ago, just to try to bulk colonies up. And what that really was, and the real issue there was that I had some areas overstocked. And the area, I have 2 different places where I keep bees. One is the home yard, where I bring cutouts and swarms and stuff to kind of stage. And then I have an area I'm trying to, got a quote, I'm trying to controlled breeding area where I'm trying to set up like a radius, around a central queen rearing area. Um, and it is 2 or 3 miles away from the nearest commercial, large scale beekeeper. Um, and yeah, I mean, I feel like if I would have gone back with the knowledge that I have right now, if I would have had that when I was catching swarms 3 and 4 years ago, I would have had a lot higher survival rates. Just because I know more about stocking rates and know more about when a colony needs to be combined, or um, when I know they're obviously from a treated colony. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to feed so it was just so part of what I did for a long time. It was just routine. Here's now it's August, now it's time to feed. So everybody, it was easy when you only had, 20 colonies, but then when you started, for me at least, when it started getting a little bit more than that, and 50, 60, then it became a real hassle just going to the store, several stores to try to find enough sugar, every
Gosh,
couple
yeah.
days, buying out the whole shelf. And there's other beekeepers getting there first and buying it out, lugging it home, mixing it up, putting it out, causing a bunch of robbing anyway. Not really, feeding the whole neighborhood, feeding the whole wilderness. And I'm looking back, it was for nothing. Like I wasted so much money and time after I just said screw it last year and didn't put out a drop of food, didn't put a drop of anything into any colonies, and had one of my top 3 winter survivals ever. And so I'm doing it again. I don't know if I'll ever feed, as a matter of routine. Maybe just here and there. Maybe if I have a colony somewhere far out by itself, but it would do no good to feed one colony here. They'd all just attack it. But
Yeah, I can't imagine mixing up sugar. I did some splits this year that were a little late, just running other parts of what I do of the business. And I kept some honey supers back. So in these out yards where I have smaller nucleus colonies, some of them were looking a little shy on honey. So I was able to bring out, frames of honey to feed these bees back. And, everything I do, I guess, that I'm moving towards with the way I keep bees is try to keep things simple, and if I have to run out to the store and, like you said, buy that sugar, mix it up, feed it to the bees, deal with robbing. And then on top of it, if you still have some of these colonies die in the winter, which is going to happen, you've got a whole bunch of frames of mixed honey and sugar.
oh yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like that stuff molds easier, it attracts all kinds of critters because it's runny and leaking and fermenting. And then what the heck do you do with it? You got to worry about if you've got honey supers on some colonies, like, are they going to end up putting that in there? It's kind of, it's like, oh, you cross your fingers and you hope it doesn't end up in the crop for the next year. It makes things more difficult, And if I have less survival, because these colonies aren't full, well, I need to change something about how I'm keeping, or I need to find bees that can forage better. I've got too many bees in that yard, or they're just not good enough foragers. I don't want them around. It's really as simple as that.
So, as a treatment-free beekeeper, what do people that you talk to, how do they react to that? Do you go to bee club meetings? Do you participate in any type of bee crap or anytime you talk about bees and they hear that, they give you the rundown, that they read you the riot act, like the way they do to me?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they've got it in Pennsylvania, and everyone's probably got their own version of it, but they call it Iowa Nice, and it's like you've got like the last like piece of pizza, and you both want it, but you stand there next to the piece of pizza for an hour and a half and you talk about something else while you're both glancing at it. No one wants to take it. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't give me a hard time about being treatment free, but it's usually just in the virtual world, people are a little bit more bold about trying to call you out for things they don't agree with. In person, I don't run into a lot of it, but also because I don't really go to a lot of these meetings. Now, there was a fella who, I do tree trimming, and there was a fella in the community who wanted me to come look at some trees for him. So I went over to his place, and it was kind of like the classic situation. Yeah, I need these down, but I don't want to spend a lot of money, and I need it done tomorrow. Got to love those customers in any situation. And as I'm kind of talking through him with it, out of nowhere, he just starts yelling about how I don't treat. And he said, I'm just, kind of step back and you just sit there and you listen to him for a while. And, you wait for him to kind of cool off and you say, like, are you done? No, I'm not done. And then they go again. And eventually they cool down. But this guy, he said, yeah, I had somebody next to me 2 years ago that didn't treat their colonies, and every single one of my colonies died. And it was like, oh, dude, if that's what killed your bees, like, first of all, just thinking about how many bees are living on the landscape free, whether or not it's a feral, whether or not it's a really tough mite resistant breed, whether or not they're breeding earlier than or flying faster or whatever the research says. Those bees are out there all the time. And if a person with 2 colonies next door, like not treating, killed like all 15 of yours, like, holy cow, man, I wouldn't want those bees anywhere near mine. I wouldn't want them, flying, my queen's flying and mating with his, they couldn't handle it, I think the whole thing is a joke, not saying that all bees are resistant, because they're not, but he had other issues at hand.
Yeah, I think it was Natalie B that I was talking to that said, they'll bring up mite bombs, which I just talked about the other day, but there's also the idea of drone bombs, and on the one hand, they might say, your bees are killing mine, which would be funny if any of my beekeeping neighbors said that, because if my bees are causing theirs to die, but mine are still alive, then they need to get bees from me so we can just be on
Yeah.
Mine aren't dying. I have just a normal, acceptable amount of bees die, really. But the drone bomb is like, here I am trying to weed out the weakest genetics that I have, and I got Joe Schmo over here bringing in the absolute lowest level bees possible. So when I'm making splits and I have I'm bringing home unmated queens and swarms, they're mating with those, so it can go both ways, really. A selection will fix it all no matter what. But no, that is right. Some guy has a bunch of bees, 2 little colonies killed his bees. What would be funny is if the 2 that the guy didn't treat still lived.
Yeah.
Because then what's the response to that? I don't know.
Yeah, people need something to blame, and I guess I'm happy to be that if it makes them feel better. I'm not gonna lose any sleep over it. Right. Another way that talking about like the breeding area is, I mentioned I've got like a central queen rearing yard, and then within 1 to 2 or 2.5 miles around that, I've got 6 other yards that I keep colonies in. I had a woman approach me at a new yard I started last year, and she was started talking from the road with her dog, and then wandered up, and come to learn she was just really shy, and like I asked her about treating. It was the obvious point in the conversation for that to kind of come up, and she said she did last year, but she really didn't want to. And then she started apologizing for talking about like not wanting to treat her bees. And it was like, listen, you're talking to the right fella here. I'm on board. And I told her I'd get her a queen or 2 for next year to if her colonies survive, run with them. But if they don't, pick up a package, or I can make you a nuke. And get more of my genetics in the area. That's another goal of mine next year, because there are a few hobbyist beekeepers within, a couple of miles where I'm at. And I'm going to be reaching out to these folks and seeing if I can just give them queens, um, 'cause try to put it on the drone information highway. It can only be good from there.
I had a I had a similar situation happen. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but I got a swarmer call, and it was only about 3 miles from here, and I was pretty happy about it. So I go flying over there, and there's this gigantic swarm hanging on a little bush. It was like 3 feet off the ground, perfect situation. And the husband and the wife are out front, and they're just all excited, and I'm sliding my box under them, just talking to them, figuring they're just a regular homeowner that doesn't have bees. And
Yeah.
I said, hey, is there any idea where they may have come from? Do you have any hollow trees with bees flying in or out? And she's like, no, we actually have a beehive in the backyard. I was like, oh, really? I was like, oh, I didn't know you're beekeepers. I was like, you want me to put this in your box or what? She's like, no, we don't have another box. And she points up to this kind of little hill next to the house. There was all these raspberry brambles growing. You could barely see the thing. And she's like, yeah, we put that top bar hive up there last year, and we didn't order bees. The bees just moved right in. So they could have been my own bees, and I was like, so I was like, and you didn't, she's like, I really wanted to be a beekeeper, but I was afraid to go in it, and I didn't want to tear the nest apart. So I just left it alone. I just totally left it alone. I'm like, wow. I was like, so you put it there, they moved in, survived the winter, and now they're swarming. I said, so did you treat them or anything like that? Because I always sneak that in there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
She did the same thing you were talking about. She just dropped her head and was like, no, I didn't. I was like, don't feel bad about that. I was like, I love this. This is great.
Yeah.
And since she's so close by, I told her, hey, I didn't really know why she had bees. She just wanted to have them, wanted to watch them. And I don't really know what happened then, but I told him, if now that I got some free bees from you, if they do end up dying and you want to learn more about how to get in there and mess with them, or if you need more bees, let me know. But never did hear from him again. But it is kind of funny, the people that are ashamed of not treating their bees. I mean, the bullying is pretty strong, where especially on social medias. You can be bullied from somebody thousands of miles away that you have no effect on whatsoever, and they're actually fuming mad at you, and don't know anything about your situation, where you're at. It's the struggle's real out there.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
So let's see. There was a couple questions in here, a couple comments. Let me see. I guess you were talking about how you got some equipment from somebody who retired. Tim is asking, he's saying they're not allowed to buy used equipment unless it's treated unreasonably, which I'm guessing means ultraviolet or something like that, whether or radiation they do to stuff.
Okay.
How do we feel about that? I don't know. How do you feel about it? Then I'll go.
I mean, American foul brood is probably what they're talking about if you're talking about trying to irradiate, boxes and that kind of thing. And while that still exists, it's I mean, we've seen from research that there are bees that can clean out American foul brood. Also, its relation to chalk brood. I think there's a relationship there where chalk brood can keep foul brood in check. But it's not as big as a problem as it was. That being said, in Iowa, you only have to have equipment inspected if it's drawn comb. So anything besides drawn comb here can be sold without, being inspected. It's pretty easy to see, if you've got a little bit of training, to see if there is a American foul brood scale in the bottom of comb. Now I've gotten boxes and frames and stuff from every year. It seems like I get a phone call from someone's uncle who bought honey from me, and they've got a 3 pallets of beekeeping equipment, in the back shed that I can have if I bring them a half gallon or something. And I've never ran into the situation where I've picked up American foul brood from it. There's other ways around it. I mean, you can wax dip at a high temperature. You can do the lye washes and that kind of stuff. But I think it's played out to be a bigger issue than it was historically. Now, I don't want it in my yard by any means, but yeah, I shoot. Does that answer
Yeah,
all?
Kind of like what you said. I haven't heard of any cases of American foul brood here ever. I mean, not since I've been messing with bees, but I'm not really sure what the law is. I think there is some type of law here to sell equipment. Used equipment has to be inspected, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how they're gonna. I don't really know that process, but I can say that I have taken in tons of free equipment, and I don't think I've ever bought used equipment. I think I've just always been given it, and some of it's been really messed up, but I still use it somehow. I use it till it just falls apart.
Yeah,
or I make swarm traps out of it. I get inspected every year, usually twice a year. I've never had any cases of AFB. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's overkill. I think that American foul brood spores are present everywhere, like literally everywhere. So you could sterilize it. It's still going to get them back in there again. Let's see.
And that ties in a little bit to another one of these things about beekeepers. Being aggressive with the way I manage my colonies. I've got a pretty good relationship with the state bee inspector here in Iowa, and he makes a trip out to my yard every year because I want to keep him up to date on what I'm doing out there. As much as like I don't care about my perception to the public, if my intention is to try to get more bees that I feel have the genetics that I choose that I want those kind of folks on my team. He comes out and inspects my colonies and looks for these kind of things. If I have any questions, I bring him out. But I think I've heard once from him in the last 4 years a case of American foul brood. Now he obviously doesn't tell me about all of them, but yeah, it just doesn't seem to be something that was as common as it was in the 90s.
Yeah, and I think I think it can exist in feral colonies too. I mean, I don't actually. I think it doesn't really exist as much in feral colonies. That's one of the big fears that beekeepers will try to impress on people, that you don't want to get these feral bees. You don't know where they've been. You don't know what they have. They could be spreading this or that, but I really find that that's not the case. Where it's usually found is, at least in Western PA last year or the year before, it was found from bees that were bought commercially and brought up to that area. And I don't remember whatever happened with that. I guess they contained it pretty quickly. Maybe it doesn't spread as fast as people say it does. I mean, I know how people say that it does, and then they just repeat it. They may have never actually been through it. But yeah, I've been checked, and I've never had any suspicion of having AFB. So I really just don't think about it. I think about it less than I think about varroa mites, which is very, very rarely. I just never think about it.
Occasionally in a colony that's really infested, I found a varroa mite on my chest one day. I came home to shower. I found one scuttling around on me, and it was like, oh yeah, that colony is definitely riding a pretty high load. And yeah, we'll see what happens to him this winter. But no, it's mostly like viewing it from like the the perspective of a biologist as an ecologist, that's just part of the community, and they can either respond to it or not. And, it's as simple as that.
All right. Well, I think we had a pretty nice little chat here. As if there's any last things you want to talk about, you can let me know, or we can just wrap it up. You tell me.
I'll just touch, just because I think it's been working well for me here. Just speak a little bit on my Hive setup, and I've been acquiring 10 frame boxes from folks, and they're heavy for me to lift. I had a back injury that put me out for a little while, so I've been taking all my 10 frame deeps and cutting them down to 7s, and then just getting a rough cut, board to slap on the side. Plenty of wood glue, nails. And that way I get a 7 frame box, which I like to run. And then I also get a 2 frame mating nuke out of the deal. So my colonies are easier to lift. They move vertically well, through the winter, honey stored up. However you want to think about bees moving and surviving in the winter. But I'm happy to get a nuke out of the deal too. I've also simplified my lids to where it's just a piece of plywood and a cedar shim. That way I don't have to worry about inner cover and a lid. A lot of this stuff, not feeding, not treating, making these boxes smaller, getting rid of things like inner covers. It's all about just kind of making it simpler for me, the beekeeper. There's a little bit of work on the front end of it, it seems like, especially related to the equipment. But down the road, I just see it being much more simple. And I really like the 7 frame setup, and I love the 2 frame mating nuke.
I don't have any 7 frame boxes, but I do like that idea, because I feel like 8 frames is just a tiny bit too big. And I love 5 frame boxes, but they could be a little bit bigger. So I think 7 would be a nice size. I like it. Yeah. And then if you get, like you said, you get a little mating nuke out of it. And I did, the last guest that I had on, he does the same thing you were talking about with the cedar shims under the lid. And I tried that a couple times, and just on a couple colonies. So I had a couple issues with just them gluing and propolizing the lid really bad. So, but I think there's ways around that. I think the one I did, I would take kind of a double layer of wood and just cut out an entrance in the bottom piece of wood so it'll be flat. So the bee space is still perfect all the way around, except for just right there at the entrance. So that's kind of one way I got around that. Noah Riding asked if we were taking questions, which absolutely. If there's any questions, let's see what he has to say here. Okay, Noah says, okay, well, I get a bit frustrated that when I go on beekeeping videos, they seem to only talk about mites and treatments as the only options. I wish there was more than just throw a bunch of chemicals. Well, that's kind of what this whole channel is about, and that's what me and Noah are talking about. If you're talking about how can you deal with mites just without quote unquote chemicals, I would kind of part ways at the first part, just because I don't deal with mites at all. I just select for bees that survive regardless of mite loads. So there's really no good answer for that. There's no such thing as chemical-free beekeeping. There's no such thing as natural beekeeping. Everything's chemicals, and even if you found some weird organic herbal way of dealing with something, it's still a treatment, so it's not something I would ever take part in. But I definitely understand the frustration Noah has. Just all the videos are just constantly talking about treatments all day. I don't know how they enjoy 1 minute of it.
There's a lot to weed through, that's for sure. And you'll find, as you move through your experience beekeeping, those first few years, those videos will be great. And then you'll just start using them to learn very specific things. And when you learn very specific things, they often don't push the treatment thing, You're just trying to pick up one little bit about beekeeping. Yeah, they'll get over it.
So Noah says, I don't mean you guys and not criticizing, but that's what I was curious to bring up. Um, yeah, no, it's okay. I go live every once in a while, not too often. I really like having guests on. I was glad that I did the little post on Facebook and got a few people to agree to come on. So far, everybody's been great. And yeah, so just, follow along. Let's see what else we got here. First year I did bees. Those bees, I think, had Africanized genes. I didn't know that at the time, but then I found out later, when years later, bees were more gentle. Um, you know what? There's a guy called the Killer Bee Guy who asserts that Africanized bees exist in every state, in North America and in Canada and every part of it, which is kind of a slick statement. I'm sure that you could find some genetics of Africanized bees in just about every area, but that doesn't mean that they exist the way they do in places like Texas and Florida and California. They're not just permanent. You might have a little bit of those genetics sneak in like in a nuke or something like that. Do you ever have extremely defensive bees up there in Iowa?
I've got one colony right now. Funny you bring it up. I had a lot of bees in the home yard last year, and I did some requeening in the late summer with some of these genetics, and there was one colony that just wouldn't let me get in there. And like I don't like wearing veil or gloves or suit or any of that stuff. I'll have a veil in my car, and by the time I get the veil out, I've already been stung in the face 6 times, and I'm cussing, fuming mad. I'm one of those guys. Um, but I never got around to requeening it. They made a honey crop 2 years ago, but just never got around to doing it because they were so aggressive. This year, they were the only colony to survive in that home yard, and they made, gosh, 90 pounds of honey, maybe more, plus filled, 2 7-frame, deeps full of their winter stores. And I was able to graft off of them this year. Their brood pattern looked completely healthy. They're one of my best colonies. Now they get really aggressive at certain times of the year, in the fall when the goldenrod hasn't started or when the goldenrod stopped. They're definitely a bit more testy, and I know to open them last when I go into the bee yard if I'm going to be messing with bees. But I think if I would have requeened that colony, I would have lost a good source of genetics. Now, if it was something that was Africanized that was going to be tearing me up every time I walked in there, I don't want to deal with that. That's just not going to be fun. But a little bit of aggression in a colony, I'm not against it. If that has any correlation, which who knows if it does or not, but to being defensive to pests or anything else, yeah, I'm excited to see how they do. This will be her third year, and I guess maybe even her fourth, because I caught the colony as a swarm. So it's one of my best. That's got a little edge to him.
Yeah. So Noah here brings up a good point. He says it may have been that they had Africanized genes that made them not survive more than the mites, because Africanized bees tend. He says that they don't have good bee fat. I'm not sure. I really don't know the level of fattiness that Africanized bees have, but I do hear that from people who actually keep Africanized bees, that they don't survive winters like in the north. So it could be that a lot of people that get Florida packages or Texas packages could have their bees just dying because they have genes that aren't from bees that live in winters. So I don't know. It's definitely something to think about. Well, I had a mean colony too for the past couple of years that I've actually tried to kill. I tried to starve them last year, took every drop of their honey, threw a big old empty box of foundation on there just to let them freeze to death. They were so mean and nasty. And this spring, they were alive, and that top box was still packed with honey and drawn and everything. And I had the terrible task of splitting them up into 5 nukes. Couldn't find the queen because it was just a blur of bees the whole time. And then I eventually did find her, but I had her in such a small nuke that it wasn't a big deal anymore. And then they ended up swarming. so that they're gone. They ended up, I think they went into a swarm trap that I have in my neighbor's yard, and that colony just happened to die. Like they got robbed. So that original queen that I've had for a while is dead, and all her daughters are perfectly fine. They're not mean at all.
Well, we can say what we want about Tom Seeley. He does some good science, but he has some research from that Arnott Forest. I think the most recent time he did genetic analysis of those bees was saying that even all the way up there in northern New York, they've got, I think, 2% of the genetics that he had, were Africanized. So like even through the genetic grapevine, they're moving all the way up to these isolated places. So yeah, it's around.
It probably depends on the percentage of their genetics, really. I mean, I think full-blown Africanized hybrids probably won't do well, in Pennsylvania. But maybe they got moved a little bit north and survived and got, some local bees mixed in and then moved a little bit more, So by the time they get up here, they may be less.
Well, that's the cool thing about these genetics too. It's like the genetics that ensure survival eventually will work their way through, given time. That's just, imagine how far those genes have traveled, they do a good job without our help.
Yeah, I think about that too. Sometimes, how drones can pretty much go into any colony. Well, what if they fly 5 miles away and park in a colony there, and then the next day go 5 miles even further away? They can really put some distance between themselves and their mother colony. That is interesting. Joe Ham asks, he says, wants to learn more about managing colonies without feeding. Can we talk more about that? I don't really know how much. I mean, there's a few things I could say about that. Maybe Ben will agree, but it really depends on your area. I mean, I'm not sure where Joe Ham is from, but my area in Pennsylvania is very different from Western Pennsylvania or Northern. Southern, and then even where I live now in the middle of farmland, like right across my driveway, the little road, there's a giant cornfield, thousands of acres of corn everywhere. When I lived in the city about 20 miles from here, I never fed my bees. I didn't even know feeding was a thing because I wasn't on Facebook. I wasn't on YouTube. I didn't read bee books. I just kept bees in boxes, and I never fed them in the city because there was just so much forage around the railroad tracks and around buildings and just everywhere. So it really depends where you're at. Where I live now, it's a risk to not feed, but I still don't feed anyway. I would say really try not to put 50 colonies in the same place. If you only have 2 or 3 or less than 10 and they're spaced out, and you're in an area where there's, some rivers and some creeks and ponds and things and a little bit of forest and stuff, and you have 4 seasons, I don't see why you should need to feed your bees unless you're totally taking all their honey or splitting them too hard or having different issues. What would you say about that, Ben?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I wouldn't overstock my bee yards, and that may take a couple of years to figure out how many you can keep in an area. But I mean, those summer honey flows, even in areas that have really poor fall nectar flows, like my house here, it's got a lot of beekeepers in the area. The university brings in pallets full around here. But there's still enough basswood and clover to go around for everybody to make a ton of honey in the summer. Now, come fall, that goldenrod flow, although there's a lot of goldenrod around here, the competition's tough, and they're not going to put on any weight in the fall. if I took honey at the end of July, um, they'd be hard pressed to 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 gain 20 pounds from there on out. I mean, it's almost just enough to keep them alive. Um, so in one way, I learned I don't harvest that honey from my home yard. I let them keep that as their winter survival. Um, and that'll kind of influence, what kind of size boxes you want to use and how you can move frames around and that kind of thing. If you want to condense for winter, or how big of a colony you want to keep. In other areas, I can pull honey in July, and I can routinely, especially in the river valley, I can routinely count on August and September honey flow to give me at least one full deep of honey. Maybe if I pull at the middle of July. If I pull in the middle of July, they'll definitely be fine. I'm gonna have to even worry about swarming in a good year. I think, a lot of the things with the way I keep and a lot of other treatment-free folks keep, if we're not feeding sugar, we're having to do less work. If we're not treating, we're not having to spend as much money. We're not having to do as much work. And if I let the bees store enough honey for themselves to survive in the winter, I'm doing less work. I may get a smaller honey crop, but I got time to do all the other things that I want to do. So, yeah.
I think, yeah. So in order to not feed, just make sure, get a sense of how many bees you can keep in your area. Everybody will say, go talk to local beekeepers, but 3/4 of them don't know shit anyway. So be careful talking to anybody. I'm not sure where the guy with the question is from, like what area. But in Pennsylvania, maybe you might have a big operation near you, kind of get an idea if there's bees around, if there's somebody keeping a ton of bees. But also another thing is just managing space. I like to get a good amount of honey off in July and try to get my bees down to one box or one deep and a medium or so. I'm not great at doing that. Some of mine are way too big. I find that my biggest ones get robbed out. So also, if you're not feeding, one thing that I learned, if you're not feeding, make sure your colonies are really populated, because they need to do a ton of work to go get their stuff, and they also need to protect themselves. So if you see dwindling colonies happening, don't just try to nurse them. Like, either shake them out or combine them or do something. If you see a robbing situation happen, just for me, this is what I do. If I see a colony that I see is getting robbed, I let them rob it. I'm not going to try to stop it, because stopping it always causes more, for me anyway. It causes that whole cloud of bees to move right next door to a colony that's perfectly fine and wasn't expecting this 50,000 bees to show up at their door. Then you're going to get a perfectly good colony robbed out. So I let them just focus on that colony that probably went queenless and had land workers or something happened in there that they're just no good anymore. Let them focus on it till it's totally empty, and hopefully it gets cold before they just keep flying forever and burning energy. I'm missing some. Let me just see if there's a bunch of comments, but I'm going to try to just quickly address here. Joe Ham also asks, should I expect heavy losses for a few years while selecting for bees that don't need feeding? I don't know what to say to that. Again, if you're catching bees for free, you're mostly going to be selecting for survival. I don't know if you're treating or not. I can't even talk to that at all, but you could lose a bunch of bees. You also might not. You have to have the beekeeping part down first. You're going to make mistakes if you're new, but you'll make less and less as you go on. Most of your losses are going to be as a result of mistakes, or taking bad advice.
Yeah, I mean, if you're catching a swarm late in the season, they might have trouble, storing enough honey. But if you're talking about a colony that like overwinters and actually can go through a full season, I've never met an overwintered colony that couldn't store enough honey that would get them through winter. Treated, treatment free, no matter what. Those summer flows hit in a lot of places, and it's mostly about not taking all the honey if you've got a full season under your belt. I wouldn't
And
expect the nectar to be an issue.
and I talk a lot about selecting, but it's not like I'm out there evaluating very closely and doing intrusive things. The bees select themselves, really. You capture the bees, do the beekeeping, have fun with it. Try not to make drastic mistakes, and the bees will select themselves. Um, for my feeling is, if I had, let's say, 10 colonies and 9 of them die, but one lives, as long as one lives, there's no excuse for the other 9. Like, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one I want to requeen anything I get in the future on. Now, if they all die every single time, I'm either doing something really wrong, or just the bees in that area are terrible. But at least I still got the beekeep, and I can catch 10 more next year. I don't know too many people have that problem of just all their bees dying. I just don't see it. I
No.
hear people saying that it happens, but I don't see it.
I'd call that beekeeper error. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm just gonna quick go through some of these comments here. I see there were some questions. People say Africanized bees have less beef fat. This comes from official researchers on the beef fat called vitellogenin. Right. Yep. Yeah. Vitellogenin is, once you get, you're starting to get into anatomy of bees. It's all interesting stuff. So maybe they have low levels of vitellogenin. I'm not sure. Yeah, they're definitely more vulnerable. So another thing I was curious about, do we ever like this double winter thing? It's like where we are, it'll get cold, then it'll warm up, then cool again. It seems like it's harder for bees. I have that here really, really bad. Do you have that kind of temperature roller coaster where you're at?
Yeah, definitely. Old timers will say it's changed too. It's more common than it was.
Yeah, for me, it's weird because it can be bad, but it can also be good. For me, if there's a good long cold period and then a warm day or so, that's good to let all the bees out to do their cleansing flights, and that's always great. But yeah, long warm periods and then short cold periods, just all wacky. I think it definitely is harder for bees, and like you said, it's becoming more of a thing that happens. My best year was when we were negative 22 degrees for like 3 weeks straight, and every single one of my colonies lived. And I thought that every single one of them died because I went out there and I thought they were dead because they didn't even come out on the next warm day. I said, no, I lost them all. That's it. Next thing I know, it warmed up and half of them were flying. I said, oh, phew, at least half of them lived. But no, they actually all lived. A lot of them just didn't come out even though it warmed up.
Well, if we're selecting for bees that can manage this relatively new pest, 20 some years in the States, why not select for bees that can handle swings in winter too? They're only going to be tougher down the road.
Yeah, it's been a lot longer than 20 years. It's been like, when they find 1986, so we're talking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like 40 something years.
Okay.
Tom Manasco says it might be that Noah just wasn't as good with bees when he started, and bees can smell fear. My first few years were horrible. Well, yeah, I think with everybody's not good when they start. There's some people do pick it up really quickly, as I've noticed. And some I know who've been doing it for 20 years are still terrible. They're still horrible, and you can see them. But yeah, you can definitely lose a bunch just from I know I did some dumb stuff when I first started. So dumb that I probably wouldn't even talk about it. Let's see. I now don't wear protective gear. I've been thinking about that too. I don't like to say that I want to copy off anybody, but I do wear a mosquito net over my face most of the time. Spring, summer, until late summer. Late summer, I have to have the whole suit on. But I'm starting to think I don't even need anything on in spring, spring or early summer, because I just never have bees going after my face or at all. They're just never stinging me. Do you use protective gear when you're messing with your bees?
I try not to. Sometimes they're pretty aggressive, and I'll throw a veil on. They seem to like my face more than anything, but I don't really respond to stings, so it hurts, but I don't swell up or nothing like that. So everybody's different.
Well, the one lesson I learned: just don't exhale on them.
Yeah.
If you exhale on them, that just gets them going straight at your mouth and your nose and everything, and that's even in the good time of the year. So exhaling, I kind of hold my breath or blow out to the side a little bit, and just not moving really fast. If people watch too many YouTube videos where they're just yanking frames out and they flip them over and they jam them back in, it gives me the heebie-jeebies seeing that. But
I had this state inspector out, and I told him I was running a couple of Russian colonies from these different breeders, and he was going, "I can't believe you don't wear any kind of suit or any kind of." It's like, man, if you just move slow, you don't roll bees. I see some of these folks who even instruct in our region, and like like I said, they're tearing hives open, they're yanking frames out. Bees are getting rolled, and I try to stand there without any equipment on, and they're making them so mad they're stinging me for being 7 feet away.
Yeah, yep.
And if folks would just slow down, I think you could avoid some of that if that's your MO.
Yeah, well, I'll pretend that I'm a sideline or a commercial beekeeper watching you say that right now. Well, they're going to say, we don't have time to do this and that, move slow. And oh, these guys over here, I don't care at all about what commercial beekeepers think, what they do. I don't care at all whatsoever. So anybody watching the commercial beekeeper, I don't care. There's nothing wrong with moving nice and slow through your hive. Here we're trying to enjoy ourselves. We don't get up and slog through, growing about going to do beekeeping all day. I love it. I mean, can't imagine a bad day messing with bees, but move slow with them bees. That's what I say.
No doubt.
Noah Riding says, do you think it's really bad heat in the summer that causes a lot of queen failures in fall that people are experiencing? I see a few queen failures around September. I'm still learning about that because I don't have extremely hot summers. I don't know if we even got into them above 92, I think maybe once or twice this past summer. And I can see right now that I have some colonies where queens are definitely failing. and I can tell that after they get robbed out, after they get completely cleaned out and bees aren't even going in them anymore, I can take it apart and see the big giant bullet cells where it was laying workers at some point. And I don't know what happens. I don't know how that happened. If they swarmed. I mean, I don't think they swarmed. I kit most of my swarms. I was pretty good with that this year, as I usually am. And they would look great all the way up until they didn't anymore. So yeah. Let me just look at that question again. Is it late summer heat that causes queen failures? That'd probably be something you could ask like a professional beekeeper. I don't know the answer to that one, because I'm not in a hot area like that. And you're in Iowa, so your weather is probably kind of similar to mine. What is your lowest temperature, sustained temperature in the wintertime?
I mean, it's common to get into the single digits and the teens, for periods of time.
Okay.
Have
so that's like us, yeah.
Have the occasional polar vortex to get down into the negative 20 or 40 or something, But
yeah, that's just like ours. And then what about in summertime? How hot do you guys get?
Yeah, we'll get into the 90s, for sure. if it gets above 95, everyone's like, man, it's a little too much out there.
Yeah, so your weather is almost the same as ours. We must be at this similar latitude. Richard Toms, he says, I don't wear gear in my apiary, but I've learned to wear a veil when I visit anyone else's apiary. Yeah. I was trying to help these researchers do some research work one year, a couple years ago. And I just showed up like I normally do, shorts, t-shirt, and I had my little mosquito net. And they had all these volunteers. And man, I don't know what they were doing. This dude had bees for like 8 years. The other people had bees for 6, 7 years. And they were yanking frames. They had a big giant cloud stinging the living daylights out of me. I had to run away from there and jump in the car. And I told them, I'm out of here, man. I can't. And I'm not like that on my own yard. I just don't want to get stung right in the eyeball. We'll take another question. And then we've been here for a while, so I don't want to keep you up too late. Man. I got to get up at 3 a.m. for work tomorrow. So let me see. Barbara Simmons asks, could queen failure have anything to do with decreased numbers of drones due to IPM for Varroa destroying drone cells? That's a good question. I don't think that there's enough people calling drone cells to really affect anything. Plus, I encourage treaters to call drone cells because I don't want those drones flying. So call them bad boys all you want, freeze them. But I really don't think so. It definitely wouldn't be the reason in my case because I've never called any drone cells. So there's plenty of drones here. There's feral colonies right up the road. I have bees a couple miles away. There's just tons of bees here that have never been managed for Varroa in any way, or had drone cells removed. But I don't think there's people who do that, but I think they're really a very small percentage.
I don't think it's that common.
What's that?
I wouldn't think it's that common. I don't meet anybody who does it routinely.
Yeah. All right. Noah Riding says, thank you again. You're welcome. Thank you to everybody who came in and hung out with us. And thanks again to Ben for hanging out. You got to come back sometime in the future. Just send me a message. You ever want to chat about something, just let me know.
Yeah, that sounds great. Get into next season and see how the bees come through. And appreciate you over the years listening to your stuff. And happy to be here and for part of the community.
All right. Thank you. And with that, we'll say good night, everyone. Have a good night and take care.